SFBBO, promoting sustainability by engaging communities for more than 40 years. Our Birdie Hour speaker series is a free virtual program. On April 30th, 2026, SFBBO Science Director Maddy Schwarz gave a talk, Snowy Plover Nesting Patterns, Motus Tagging, and More for our community.
So hi everybody. My name is Maddy Schwarz. I am the Snowy Plover and Least Tern Program Director at SFBBO, and this talk that I'm giving today is going to go over some basics of plovers and plovers in the bay, and then more specifically, talk about the results and lessons learned from the first U.S. Motus tagging study of the Pacific Coast distinct population segment of snowy plovers, which is a project that we completed last year with the help of through funding from Fish and Wildlife and California Department of Fish and Wildlife, in association with H.T. Harvey and Associates and Absat Research Associates, and using Motus technology. So excited to talk to all of you about that. But before we get to that, we're gonna go through some more basic stuff. So first part, we're just going to go over snowy plovers basically, their identification, their biology. Then we're going to talk about snowy plovers in the Bay Area specifically, where they breed, what their habitat looks like, the threats that they're facing, and also how they interplay with tidal marsh restoration. And then I'm going to quickly go over the general results of the 2025 breeding season. And then we're going to get to the exciting stuff, talking about the Motus project. All right, so part one, the Western Snowy Plover. So this is a Western Snowy Plover. This is what they look like. They are a small ground nesting shorebird that is approximately 6 inches tall, aka about the size of a soda can, and they only weigh about 8/4 worth of mass, so they are very small. And the males and the females look pretty similar, but the males during the breeding season get these dark shoulders and the dark eye markings and a dark forehead band, whereas the females stay a lot paler. And then in the winter, the males lose that darker breeding plumage, and so every bird is just brown like this, and you can't sex them in the winter. But right now during the breeding season, you can. This is what the chicks look like. They are precocial, which means that they are able to be independent very quickly upon hatching. So if you think like chickens or quail or turkeys, those kind of cute fluffy chicks, not the like terrifying naked dinosaurs like raptor chicks or passerine chicks. So the first picture on the left is a chick that just hatched. You can tell it just hatched because it's still wet from the egg. And then the second photo is chicks that are dry, but they still hatched within 24 hours because you can see the one on the left still has an egg tooth, which is that white mark at the end of their bill that will fall off after 24 hours. And then the third picture is a chick that's probably like 3 to 4 weeks old. You can see it mostly looks like a bird, but it's still a little scruffy. And then the last picture is a fully fledged juvenile that is capable of flight. So now let's talk about snowy plovers in the bay specifically. This is where I think most of us probably live. And if you've spent any amount of time along the marshlands of the bay, you know that there's all of these salt ponds that are shown very clearly in this satellite photo. But of course, it did not always look like this back before colonization. There was basically all of this region or all of the edges of the bay were tidal marsh. It was a complex network of sloughs and marshes, and there was very little salt pan. You can see in this photo you can see that the salmon color is the salt pan kind of habitat, and so there's really only a little bit in the east side of the bay, and everything else is tidal marsh or tidal flat. But then, as you can tell if you are a small brown bird who is relying on being camouflaged with your habitat to survive, this nice green, like luscious green and blue marsh is probably not going to be your best bet, because you're brown and you want to be in habitat that is also brown. But then fast forward, like to the year 2000. This is from when this map is from. And all of that tidal marsh, the vast majority of that tidal marsh has been diked and drained and turned into these salt ponds that were used for salt production all throughout most of the 20th century. And uh, yeah, so now there is a lot more plover habitat. Look at this crusty salt pond and look at all the plovers that can go that can go on this salt pond habitat. So this is where the plovers breed within the bay. They breed on these former salt ponds that are still dry. So you would think that maybe this is a species that benefits from human intervention that works well coexisting with humans, but that's not quite true. Um, they are very susceptible to predators that like truly do really well in conjunction with humans. So things like red foxes and corvids. Red foxes are a non-native fox that has spread across the country from the East Coast. And corvids are like native, but their populations have exploded because they love eating human food and human trash. Um, and also, humans cause a lot of disturbance throughout most of the plover's range where they nest on beaches. On the top left photo, you can see that on a lot of beaches there are a lot of people, and that can be very detrimental to plover nesting. Also, people let their dogs run around on beaches, which I'm sure a lot of you know that birds are very threatened by dogs. And so plovers are no different. They have a very strong stress response to the presence of dogs. People will also fly drones, which have been shown to be disturbing to birds. And then on the top right photo, even in places like the bay, where for the most part these salt ponds are partitioned away from the public, there's still public trails along the edges of a lot of these salt ponds. And just people walking by on the trails can be enough to spook the plovers. And of course, if people trespass onto the ponds, then that is extra disruptive. They also have to deal with invasive plants. On the left picture, there it's showing small flowered ice plant, which is really common on all of the salt ponds. It's like a never-ending battle trying to get rid of the of this ice plant. So they have to deal with that. And then along the coast, they have to deal with sea level rise and coastal development. So there's some of you may have heard of the term of coastal squeeze, where the amount of beach habitat gets smaller and smaller because the water's coming up from the ocean side and the development and the invasive plants are coming down from the upland side. And so the amount of good beach habitat is smaller. So there's a lot of stuff that the plovers are contending with. Um, and on top of all of that, there is a big push to restore a lot of these salt ponds to tidal marsh because if we remember, that's what the bay used to look like, which is great. We want to restore habitat, but um, we have to be cognizant of how it affects the species that are using the ponds. But anyways, I'll get to that in a little bit later. So the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project is the main project that is restoring these ponds to tidal marsh. You can see in that left photo that they're breaching a levee, and that is how it gets restored. The water is allowed to rush in, and then from that point on, the pond is open to tidal action. And as you can see on the right-hand photo, the captions are really, really small, but the first photo was taken April 2008, and the second photo was taken September 2009. So within just a little bit over a year, there's already that much marsh vegetation that had regrown on the marsh plain. So that's really great to see from a restoration perspective. And this is a really big project. It's projected to take at least 50 years. We're currently like halfway through-ish the restoration project. And so, like I said, there's a lot of great aspects of the restoration project. It increases tidal marsh habitat, which is good for rails and mice, and for flood protection, carbon sequestration, all sorts of good stuff. Also, increased public access. But, like I said, it can also be detrimental to the species who've learned to adapt to using the salt ponds. So the dry ponds for breeding habitat for snowy plovers and least terns, which are the two species on the top photos. And then they're also great winter habitat for migratory shorebirds and waterfowl. So yay, we love tidal marsh restoration, but like, oh no, we also have to consider the plovers. And so that is a lot of what SFBBO's work with plovers is trying to figure out how to still support the plover population and the tern population while while working with tidal marsh restoration projects. The good news is though that over the last 20 years, the snowy plover population in the bay overall has gone up. I don't know why the years aren't showing up along the bottom of this graph, but the first year is in 2003, I believe, on the left side, and then the most recent year is 2025 from last year. And last year we had our highest count ever. You can see it says 2025 equals 389. That is the most plovers that we've ever counted in the bay during the breeding season. And we're going to be doing this annual count at the end of May. So we'll know what the count for 2026 is soon. And you can see that if you're more interested in like the details of this graph, you can see that there's two different goal lines, one at 250 and one at 500. So the 250 goal is the Salt Pond Project goal. The Salt Pond Project wants there to be 250 adult plovers within the footprint of the project. So you can see on that orange line that they have been meeting that goal for the last several years, which is really great. And then the RU3 goal at the top at 500 is the number of plovers that would need to be maintained in the bay for 10 years for the species to be delisted and not considered threatened anymore. So we still have a ways to go, but we're close to breaking 400. I'm hoping we can break 400 in 2026, but who knows? The line bounces up and down. So if it goes down a bit, can't be too sad. But yeah, okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the 2025 breeding season. This is myself and two of our biologists who are going out to do some boundary site surveys on a pond in Alviso. But anyways, so this is just a little bit more detail about that graph that I showed you just like one slide ago that is broken out by location. So you can see that so the reason why it says 341 as the total is because this is the total for the South Bay only. The 389 number includes sites in the North Bay. So that's why it's a little bit different. But we had 341 birds total. And Warm Springs was a weaker site last year. Alviso was strong though. All you need to know is that if you look at that dark brown column on the right side, if you look down at the bottom, the average from 2020 to 2024 has only been 260 birds. And so the fact that we got to 341 last year is really excellent. We want that number to keep going up. Okay. Now let's go into the breeding success for last year. So overall, we monitored 460 nests total. Well, we recorded 460 nests total, but we found 82 of those as inactive because if any of you have ever tried to bird for plovers before, you know that they're very hard to find, they're very hard to see, and trying to find them when they're just sitting really still on a nest is even harder. So a lot of the time we miss nests, and we only realize that we missed a nest because all of a sudden we see chicks running around and we're like, where'd you come from? We didn't think that there were any nests that were ready to hatch on like at this site. but obviously there was something that we missed because there's chicks. So that's why there were 82 found as inactive. So overall, we monitored 378 nests, which is still a lot of nests, and that is the highest that we've ever monitored by almost 50, which is really great to see. But it doesn't necessarily matter if the number of nests is really high, because they could just be starting a nest, it gets depredated, they start a new one, it gets depredated, they start a new one, it gets depredated. They could potentially be wasting their time. So we want to know how many nests failed and how many nests were successful to see whether it was actually a good year or not. So out of those 378, only 124 failed, 32%, which might sound like it's a lot, but it's actually quite good. So of those that failed, 107 were depredated, so 28%. Like another 10% or five, yeah, like 10%-ish were either abandoned, flooded, failed to hatch, or failed for some reason that we couldn't figure out. And that means that 225 hatched, or 60% hatched, which is really great. 60% as a hatch rate might sound kind of low, but it's actually not. It's actually a really strong hatch rate. For the history of our program, the average hatch rate has been 53%. So this was a really good year this last year for hatch rate. And we also had 29 nests that were unknown. We couldn't tell whether they hatched or failed, which was 7%. So it was a good year in terms of hatch rate. This is a map of all of the places that we had breeding. You can see that we have sites that go all the way from Hayward in the East Bay to Redwood City on the peninsula. And everything that has a black outline is where we had confirmed nests this year. Yeah, no nests at Cargill, Newark. And these were some of the uncommon sites where we had nests, which I won't go into because I don't think you guys need that much detail, but yeah. And then this is just the breeding distribution by complex. So you can see I've color coded the groups of ponds into different complexes. And so Eden Landing, Ravenswood, and Alviso are the biggest contributors. They have the most action, and that's a very typical spread. Eden Landing this year was particularly successful. But yeah, that's a pretty typical breakdown for where the plovers are spending most of their time. And then this is just a graph that I like, or a chart that I like making because I think it's interesting. Does it? Oh, I think there's supposed to be that black piece of the pie is supposed to have it's supposed to have its percentage on it, but this basically shows that the top 10 ponds are responsible for like over 80% of the breeding activity in the entire South Bay. So even though there's 19 other ponds where there was breeding, like we did have at least one nest, the top 10 ponds are responsible for 88%, or like for over 80% of all of the nesting, which I think is interesting. But anyways, that's all I have for like the basic background stuff. And now we're going to get into the actual new stuff, the new interesting stuff about Motus. So the purpose of this project was to collect fine scale movement data on snowy plovers. And this includes looking at daytime and nighttime differences, pre and post hatch locations of where adults and broods went to, inferring the brood locations based on the tagged adults location, and looking at post-breeding dispersal of the adults that bred. And then also this project was a pilot study to evaluate how well equipment from CTT, which is the brand that we bought all of our equipment from, worked to produce this data for plovers. So Motus, I saw that some people are familiar with Motus or have at least heard of it in the chat. But for those of you who don't or who have only heard of it or something, this is some information about Motus. So it's a program that's run by Birds Canada, and it's a collaborative research network to track wildlife movements. So it started with birds, but it's actually expanded into insects and bats as well. Um, Basically anything that flies, they you can put a Motus tag on. They make like tiny, tiny, tiny ones that you can attach to butterflies. It's crazy. Uh, and there are nearly 2,000 tracking stations or Motus towers spread across North America, and it's also worldwide. There's Motus towers in other countries as well, or like yeah, in other countries as well. And so when an animal with a Motus tag passes near one of the tower will record the tag signal. So you know that that animal passed that way. You can see these arrows on the map. It's showing, I guess, a Swainson's thrush, a Swainson's thrush's path from Colombia to Canada. This is kind of what I'll show you some of these maps later for the plovers, but this is kind of what the track looks like when you're using the Motus towers. You can show it traveling long distances. Um, Many towers are cellular enabled and regularly upload the detection data to Motus's server, and then that data becomes publicly available. So you can go onto Motus's website, motus.org, and you can type in any species that you're interested in, and you can see these tracks for yourself, which is really cool. And CTT is the main company that makes the equipment that's compatible with the Motus network. So this is the equipment that we used as part of the project. First of all, we need the tower. We need just the general tower because that's where all of the data is going to get sent to and aggregated. So you can see this guy working on the tower. His name is Levi. He's a CDFW employee. And CDFW operates a Motus tower in Eden Landing that was already set up. So we already had the main tower, but we added an omnidirectional antenna to it that would pick up the data from our nodes. Then on the right side of the picture, you can see this like contraption on top of a pole, and that's a node. And that is the technology that allows us to get the fine scale data. Because when you just have this setup where it's just a tower, you know that the animal passed in the vicinity of that tower, but you can't triangulate the location at all. In order to triangulate it, you need to set up a grid of nodes, which I will get into more later, but that was how we were going to get the fine scale data as we set up a grid of these basically like mini transceivers that would record a tag signal and then transmit it to the bigger tower. We also used a sidekick, which is basically like a portable antenna that you can take around that's handheld. You can take it around with you and you can just like ping tags, like just walking around. That's used for like searching for birds if you're trying to find a specific bird, and also for calibration. And then we also, of course, used the tags themselves, the tags that we actually put on the birds. And those are hybrid tags, which mean that they have a solar panel and a battery. So theoretically, they should be able to operate continuously because they charge using the solar panel during the day, and then they use the battery at night. So this was the location where we set up the two grids. We had two different grids, one at E14 and one at E6B. The Motus tower, the Motus tower is like in between those two ponds. It'll show it on the next slide. But yes, this is the general location. And here, as you can see, this is where we set up the grid. So that red dot in the middle is where the main tower is. And those grids on E14 and E6B are, each one of those yellow dots is where we put a node. So if everything's working correctly, all of those nodes will record data from whatever tags they're receiving data from, and then transmit that data to the central red tower. And then that red tower is what uploads the data to the internet. Um, so we deployed 56 nodes in total, and they were spaced 200 meters apart. And E14 had 20 nodes, and E6B had 36 nodes. So, as I said before, if everything's working correctly, that's how it should work. The nodes will pick up the tags the nodes will pick up the tags and then transmit that data to the tower. That is not necessarily what happened. We had issues with the nodes connecting to the tower right away. We had to like restart the tower, restart the nodes. Eventually, we got all of them to connect, but it kind of was some like back and forth stuff. We also initially had put bird spikes on top of each node because we were worried that predators like a kestrel or something might perch on top of the node, and so we put metal bird spikes on top. But then when we talked to CTT, they were like, "Hey, you can't put metal on top of it; it'll mess up the signal completely." So we had to take the bird spikes out. Fortunately, I don't think any predators used the nodes. But yeah, we did have to take the bird spikes off. We also had to change the power settings on the node, and also yeah, we just had to do a lot of testing. We like switched the antenna from one mode to another mode, and eventually we got everything to connect, but it was a little bit of a struggle in the beginning. Um, then we had to calibrate the nodes and figure out what their relative signal strength indicator or RSSI was, and how far away a receiver could get from the node and still be picked up. You can kind of see it in the background. It's not like super clear, but in the background on the left side, we had these old least turn decoys. And so we attached a tag to the least turn decoy. We put it on the ground to mimic a nesting plover. And then we took the handheld antenna, the sidekick, and we walked in loops around the bird to try to, or around the tag to try to see how far away we could pick it up. And so you can see in that chart or that little map in the middle that the signal strength decreased really quickly. It was a little bit stronger when the tag was facing depending on which direction the antenna of the tag was facing. So that's why that eastern loop is complete, is because the tag was facing east. But it was not like the signal strength died out pretty quickly, and that was because of the ground effect. So if you have a radio that's trying to transmit when it's really close to the ground, a lot of that signal just goes into the ground and gets lost. And so the signal strength was quite weak. And so unfortunately, we were not able to detect tags that were more than 100 meters away from a node, which I'll go into a little bit more of why that turned into an issue later. But it meant that we had big dead zones in between each node because the nodes were spaced at 200 meters, but we couldn't pick up tag signals beyond a distance of 100 meters. Um, we also we also did another calibration where we tried to figure out how the node or how the like how many nodes a tag could ping at one time. Because if it can ping 3 nodes at a time, then you can triangulate its location. And so to do that, we had to walk a tag through the node grid in as close to field conditions and in as close to deployment conditions as we could possibly get it, which means that we got a 40-gram raw chicken tender, 40 grams of raw chicken tender, which is about the weight of a plover, and we left it raw because plovers are not cooked. And we attached the tag to it, and then we zip tied it to this like wooden pole hanging off the end of a tripod, and we walked it through the entire node grid. So I have this video of what it looked like. I have this video of what it looked like. You can see the chicken tender on the end of that pole and Josh walking through. You can see the tag. Yeah, kind of at the end right there. You can see the tag. You can't see the antenna, but yeah, we walked that through the node grid as well. Oh no, how do I go? Ah, I bungled it. There we go. Okay. So now we are actually into the point where we're ready to start catching birds. So this is the trap that we used to catch the birds. This is a walk-in trap. So basically we put the trap over the nest and all of those this trap was actually designed by a volunteer. It's designed by Byron Riono, if any of you guys know him. But it was designed by Byron, and each of those plastic poles slides up and down, so you can like slide if the ground is uneven, you can like position all of the poles so that there's no gaps where the bird can squeeze through. And then you wait for the bird to go in, and once there's a bird in there, you can walk towards the opening of the trap, and usually the bird is too freaked out and confused to try to run out, and so then you can just open the top and reach in and grab the bird. So we had a 52% capture success with this. If the bird doesn't go in after like 20 minutes, then we would just remove the trap and walk away because we don't want to keep the bird off the nest for longer than that. And then if we decided to trap a bird while we were like after the nest had already hatched, while we were banding their brood, we would place snare mats out, which are these kind of like long flat long flat mats that have loops of fishing wire on them, and the bird runs across it, and their leg gets caught in the fishing filament. What is it? That like plastic stuff. The bird gets like caught in it, and then you can take the bird out. And that is 83% capture success with that. So those are the two methods that we use to trap birds. And then this is how we actually put the tag on the birds. So obviously we want to make sure that the tag is light enough that the bird can withstand it. But with the tag itself plus this like harness that we made, the entire thing only weighed 0.75 grams, which is really small. The tag itself is 0.65 grams, so all this extra stuff only added a tenth of a gram to the overall weight of the tag. And then you can see we placed it over the bird's legs and cinched it down, and then cut off the excess elastic. And this is what the tag should look like. It sits kind of on the bird's back, just above its tail. And ideally, the solar panel is exposed to the sun and its feathers are not covering it up too badly, although we did have some issues with that as well, but I'll get into that later. All right, so results. We deployed all of our tags between June 20th and July 17th. So we got them all out like pretty fast within a month. We had 20 tags, and we tagged 12 males and 8 females. And we tagged oh yes 16 tags we deployed before the chicks hatched. So we deployed 4 tags after like as the nest was hatching, as we were banding the brood, and we tagged 16 birds while the nest was still active. We got birds from 15 different nests. 5 nests we tagged both the male and female associated with the nest. And of those 15 nests, 13 hatched and 2 were depredated. The 2 that were depredated were on E6B. Another quirk of this project was that The year that we did it, the birds decided that they basically only wanted to nest at E14. They loved E14. We had one of the highest number of nests we've ever had on E14, and they barely messed with E6B at all. We had some nests there, but not a lot, and they also didn't do well. So both of those two depredated nests were from E6B, whereas all 13 of the E14 nests hatched. And so far, we have confirmed 5 fledges of chicks that hatched from nests where the adult was Motus tagged. Okay, so now we have to get back to one of the problems that we encountered with the signal strength of the tags being so low, is that because we were losing so much of our signal strength to the ground effect, we could not triangulate the exact location of the plovers. They were usually only pinging one node at a time, so we could only make heat maps that show the general area where the bird was hanging out, but we couldn't get like an actual like track through the grid. But despite that, we're still able to get a lot of interesting information out of that. So the first thing that we learned is that the adults spend a lot of time, day and night, around the nest area. Plovers are supposed to split incubation duties. The male is supposed to incubate at night, and the female is supposed to incubate during the day. And while one adult is incubating, the other one is supposed to be off foraging and roosting and resting. But what we learned was that both adults are sticking really close to the nest. So if you look at this heat map, you can see that the male's detections are on the top and the female's detections are on the bottom. This heat blob right here, where there are the most detections, is like where the nest is essentially. So you can see that at night, the male is in fact incubating for the most part. He's like barely detected anywhere else at night when he's incubating. But during the day, when he's supposed to be foraging and doing whatever he wants, he's still spending a lot of time at the nest. And you can see the same thing with the female. At night, the female is supposed to be foraging and doing whatever she wants. And she is. She has more detections in other places than the male does. But by far, the most common place that she was detected was at the nest area. So they're still spending a lot of time. They're still going back to the nest and checking up on it very regularly, even when it's not like their shift, quote unquote. So also from that, you can infer that the incubation responsibilities are not clear-cut shifts. Like sometimes the male will incubate during the day. Sometimes the female will incubate at night. It's not like, oh, sun went down. Where are you? Time for me to not care at all until the sun comes back up. Both adults are very involved throughout the life cycle of the nest. The other very important thing that we learned from this is that once the eggs hatch, the adults immediately lead the chicks to water. They will go to the wettest part of the pond for the chicks to forage. And in fact, some adults took their brood off the pond entirely to go to nearby ponds that were even more flooded. So as you can see, this is another heat map of a pair, and it's split up into pre-hatch and post-hatch. So the nest is near this node that is highlighted in yellow. The nest is near there. Post-hatch, both the male and the female stayed with the chicks in this case, both the male and the female moved up north to the north side of the pond where there is a channel of water. The south side of the pond is completely dry. The north side has like a track of water that runs across the entire edge of the pond. So you can see very clearly that they moved them. They started spending all of their time along this northern edge. Um, some other things that we learned was that the adults will leave the chicks unattended for like multiple hours at a time. We had one male that would leave his chicks for like 2 or 3 hours on E14 and go to E6B and forage and then come back. But his chicks, I think at least one of his chicks fledged. I think two of his chicks fledged. So it worked. I wouldn't say he's a bad dad. But he did leave for significant periods of time and just leave the chicks by themselves. Um, and the last thing that we learned is that um, even after the chicks fledge, the adults might stay, like the adults may stay put. Not all of them stayed put on the same ponds, but they didn't like leave the pond entirely and go somewhere else where we couldn't track them. A lot of the adults stayed in the same place. So this is another heat map. This is a male who was tending to a brood that was on E14. And so you can see while his chicks were not fledged, over on the left side, he was spending basically all of his time. He would go occasionally to E6B, but really wouldn't spend very much time there. He was spending all of his time at the wet. And this is also another example of the chicks going to water because this northeast corner is the wettest part of E14. So was with the brood in a wet area. And then after the chicks fledged, he still stayed for the most part in that area. He has more detections in E6B, but he still spent most of his time in that wet northeast corner. So that's a example of an adult sticking around in the same general vicinity after the chicks fledge. Okay, so then finally we'll get into some more like large scale maps. So most of the plovers that we tagged just stayed local. They might do little like trips around the bay, but they didn't go anywhere crazy. So these are some birds that went to different places around the bay. So you can see that KAKK went to Napa, RKWO, KAWR. I guess RKWO went to Novato. There's a marsh like up here that in Novato that we're pretty sure that's where RKWO went to. But yeah, so Napa, Novato, and then two birds went to Point Reyes. And then there's also these other stations down in the South Bay. We had birds kind of going repeatedly from this green. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but the green circle that's closest to Hayward, that's the Eden Landing Station. The one that's close to Fremont is the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge headquarters tower. And then the furthest south green dot is the tower that SFBBO operates at our passerine banding station. So we had a lot of birds that were just bouncing back and forth between Eden Landing, the refuge, Eden Landing, the refuge, CCFS, the refuge, Eden Landing, just kind of going back and forth there. And then we had these birds that went a little bit farther north. But then we also had some birds that, like one bird that went really far. NNPK showed up on the Channel Islands, which is really crazy. He somehow like missed all of the towers in between the bay and the Channel Islands, but he showed up on the Channel Islands. And that was really cool. Oh, and then this map also shows that how our population is distinct from the Mexican population because people have been Motus tagging in Mexico for a while, and you can see that these birds go up into the interior to breed in like the Great Salt Lake, but our birds really don't go that far east. They stay along the Pacific coast. So it was really cool. We were like, "Wow, the Channel Islands!" when we got when we checked his record or this bird's records. But yeah. Oh, and then this is where I was saying it's like some overlap between the Great Salt Lakes um and our birds, but like not a lot. Um, yeah. So the final thoughts. Using nodes to track ground nesting birds is challenging because of the ground effect. It is hard to get really strong data. If we wanted to be able to trilaterate or triangulate where each bird was, we would have to move the nodes to 40 meters apart, which would mean that we would need 130 nodes just to cover E14, which we only had 20 nodes on E14 last year. We'd have to put 130 in, which would be crazy. So you have to just kind of work around the dead zones. As I just demonstrated, you can still get a lot of really useful and interesting data even with the dead zones. But that is probably to be expected. Also, we've accepted that equipment is going to fail. We had to reorder some of the solar panels on the nodes because they failed. Like I said, we had the issues with connectivity and trying to troubleshoot that. And also, this type of technology generates an insane amount of data because the tags are pinging, I believe, every 5 seconds. So if a tag is pinging every 5 seconds and it's deployed for months and the bird is running around in a place where it could be pinging one of 50 nodes every 5 seconds, and you deployed 20 tags, you're going to get a lot of data. We had over 5 million records of pings. So that takes a lot of computing power to get through and to manage the data and to analyze it. But despite all this, we learned a lot. We learned that we really want to focus on improving foraging habitat because water is so important. And we're so focused on making sure they have good breeding habitat, but as the heat maps clearly show you, they spend just as much time foraging as they do sitting on a nest. And they're also only breeding for like half the year. So they also need foraging habitat during the winter. So we really want to work on improving foraging habitat, and now we're better prepared to do future node studies. We are working with a grad student right now for the 2026 season who is hoping to look at how quickly females renest after their first nest and whether that changes whether the nest was successful or unsuccessful. So yeah, we're better prepared to help him and keep using this technology moving forward. And that's about it. I want to acknowledge the entire SFBBO team. That includes myself, primarily Josh Scullin. His name isn't on here because I stole most of these slides from a presentation that he gave. But he is the person who spearheaded like the vast majority of this. He was the person that was doing all of the troubleshooting. He was the person that was tagging these birds. This project was really like his baby to a certain extent. And so huge shouts out to Josh. Also Ben Pearl, who's the former Plover and Tern director, he was still involved with this project since he was the person who wrote the original proposal, and he helped a lot with the data analysis. And then Carlton Eister, Levi, Garrett, Parker, and the people who helped train Josh and Ben in Mexico. So yeah, that's it. That's all I have. Does anybody have questions?
Thank you, Maddy. That was a great presentation and really exciting work. We do have some questions in the chat. The first one is, what is the exact definition of fledged in relation to plovers? Does it mean they don't hang out with the parent anymore or just don't go back to the nest area?
So That is actually kind of an interesting question. Um, for the most part, it means that they're capable of flight. If they can fly, they're considered fledged. Um, Sometimes, even if plovers can fly, they'll still hang out with the parents sometimes. But we still consider those fledges as long as they can fly. They're considered fledged.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what is the impact on the birds who wear the monitors?
So as far as we can tell, there isn't an impact. That is part of what makes this like an ethical project, is that we're not affecting the birds meaningfully by putting these tags on them. Um, this is the first time that Motus tags have been put on snowy plover or the western snowy plover in the US. On the listed population, the Pacific population. It's the first time that they've been used on the Pacific population, but they have been used in Mexico, like I said, and they've been used in the Great Salt Lake. And they have not seen any negative effects from from deploying the tags. So yeah, they're so light. It's like less than 3% of the bird's body weight. So it's small, it's light enough that it shouldn't affect them at all.
Thank you. The next question is, if you find that you do need bird spikes on the nodes, use non-conductive plastic. I guess this is a suggestion. Rain may cause some minimal attenuation, but it will work vastly better than metal or wet wood. So thank you for that piece of advice.
Yeah. Yeah, we were thinking about adding plastic spikes to the nodes this year before we put them back out, but we ultimately decided that it wouldn't be worth the cost because I believe the plastic ones are more expensive. I think when we looked into it, the plastic ones are more expensive. And because we hadn't seen predators perching on any of the nodes, we were like, I think we can take our chances. But yeah, we will definitely use plastic if we find we have to.
The next question is, any lease turn modus fine structure plans for the future?
Um, yeah, so we do not have any plans for lease turns and Motus because we don't even band lease turns. That's not an approved activity under our permit. And so we would have to do a lot of like permit work and training, like to be ready to do that. It would be cool, but there's a lot of steps. Like we would have to get like banding approved before we could get Motus tagging approved. And so yeah, not any plans right now.
Okay, the next question is, are your findings similar to Mexican research findings?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not actually sure because I'm not actually sure what a lot of the Mexican research, like what the goal of the Mexican research has been. Um, I think that as far as I can, I don't know. I think we're the first people to do this kind of like fine scale movement with the nodes. I don't think that anyone in Mexico or the Great Salt Lake has done anything with the node grid. So I don't think that they have as much like fine scale data as we do. But I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. Next question is, since they are solar tags, how much does rain, fog, etc., affect the study?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And we were noticing that there was a lot of variability in how many pings each tag was registering, like how many times each tag was picked up. And on average, the females had fewer pings than the males. And we were guessing that that was because since the females are incubating during the day when the solar panel should be picking up the most like power, since they're incubating, they might be like sitting in one position with their feathers like covering the tag a little bit. And so the solar panel wasn't charging as effectively as the males panels were charging because the males are running around and foraging during the day. So that is definitely something that we ran into. And unfortunately, I don't really think there's anything we can do about it, because it's just the birds' behavior, or like you're saying, the fog and rain and whatever. Since this was during the summer, we didn't have any rain. The birds still have their tags on. Like ideally, these tags will stay on for the rest of the birds' lives. And we have gotten a lot of like, as I showed, with those maps, like we have gotten tracks of a lot of birds like dispersing. And also, most of our birds have come back to Eden Landing since the breeding season started. So the tags are working to some extent over the winter, but we removed the node grid over the winter because we didn't want the nodes to get damaged in the rain. And also on E6B, there's waterfowl hunting. So they could get shot. So we didn't want that to happen. So we took out the nodes during the winter. So we don't have as much information on like how if we were trying to get the fine scale movement during the rainy season, if that would make a big difference. But the tags, most of the tags still seem to be operational. At the start of this year's breeding season because most of our birds have shown that they've come back to Eden Landing.
Great. If there are any other questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. I think I have two kind of wrap up questions. One is, of the findings, which one surprised you the most? And also, which are giving you the most hope for plover conservation?
Well, I guess I would say the same thing for both of those questions, which is how much they love water. Which it really shouldn't be a surprise. Like, I think it was a good reminder because I think if you're used to focusing on one area of research or one area of management, like we have always been focused on breeding and breeding success and breeding habitat and all of those kinds of things. If you're so used to focusing on one aspect, then you not not that you're not seeing the forest for the trees, but that there's other important things that you might not be paying as much attention to. And so when you get data like this, it's a good like reminder that snaps you back to being like, oh yeah, they have to eat and they have to eat all the time, like not just during the breeding season. They have to eat like the entire year. Um, so I think that was a good like reminder, but also that is a like hopeful thing because it's something that you can work on. You know what I mean? Like you can try to make the ponds a little wetter. You can try to like increase the width of these channels or whatever to give them more space to forage. Like that's something that you can work with. It's not this like impossible thing that you're like, oh my God, we have no ability to help this at all. Like that is something that you can help. So that I think that was a really positive takeaway.
Wonderful. Um, I think that you might have answered this since it was typed in, but the question, did you say how long the tags remain on the bird? If you want to address
Yeah,
that a bit.
so ideally the tags will remain on the bird for their entire lifetime. Because the way that the harness is secured, it should be very secure, while obviously not like hurting the bird at all. It should be very secure, and so it should stay on for the bird's whole life. We did notice that like some of them, it seemed like they had kind of like slipped sideways like on the bird's body, but they were still transmitting, and it didn't seem to be bothering the bird. So um, hopefully that like so that I don't think that that is a sign that it's like about to fall off. Um, Obviously, if you stop getting pings for a tag, it can be hard to know whether it's because the tag fell off or whether it's because the bird died. It's really hard to figure that out. But yeah, ideally they should stay on for the rest of the bird's life.
Thank you. Well, it doesn't look like there's any other questions. Just thanking you again for a great presentation and to say that this was a really exciting talk, and I'm really excited and thrilled that this project is really taken off for your program, and we're excited to hear what happens next year. So I hope you'll do another birdie hour. Oh, sorry, there was one more question. Would there be any way to correlate moisture levels in the ground with the distances from nodes being recorded? Wondering because moisture will affect radio propagation.
Yeah, we were wondering whether birds that were like hanging out on the water, like or near water, whether their tags would ping more. I don't know if we could figure out how to like measure how much of a difference that was making. But we definitely did think about it. Um yeah, it would be interesting to see if there's a way you could actually figure it out. I guess you could maybe just take a tag through and like walk the tag in wet places versus dry places and see whether it transmitted for farther distances. That might be the easiest way to do it. Um, yeah, something to think about for sure.
So we are a little over the hour. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. And Maddy, thank you again for a great presentation. And I think it's okay if you have questions about plovers or Motus that Maddy's always available. You can send her an email.
Yeah, feel free to email me if you have any questions. mschwartz@sfbbo.org. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
SFBBO is a nonprofit. With your support, we will continue to inform decision makers, inspire people to act, and involve diverse communities in our work. Please visit our website to learn more and get involved today.